Mr. Hur chose not to bring charges because, quote, Mr. Biden would likely present himself to a jury, as he did in our interview of him, as a sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory.
He told us that he didn't remember saying that to his ghostwriter. He also said he didn't remember finding any classified material in his home after his vice presidency. And he didn't remember anything about how classified documents about Afghanistan made their way into his garage. Charges were not warranted.
Correct. Now let's talk about why. I have limited time, so please, when I say correct or not correct, answer the question.
It was not a hypothetical. This is the issue at hand.
He slid those files into his recycle bin on his computer.
Tried to destroy the evidence, didn't he?
Correct.
So it's a lie, is just what regular people would say, right? Yeah, all right.
Not senile people. I mean, I would object to that comment. People see nobody suggests he's senile, and that's disrespectful of senior people with any kind of memory disability.
Gentleman's time has expired.
The president is unfit for office.
You have just made. That is not what happened.
Let me move on.
Partisan politics
you are a member
whatsoever.
I just find that interesting. Mr. Hur chose not to bring charges because, quote, Mr. Biden would likely present himself to a jury, as he did in our interview of him, as a sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory. A forgetful old man who Mr. Hur said did not remember when he was vice president, forgetting on the first day of the interview when his term ended, and forgetting on the second day of the interview when his term as vice president began. Mr. Hur produced a 345-page report, but in the end, it boils down to a few key facts. Joe Biden kept classified information. Joe Biden failed to properly secure classified information. And Joe Biden shared classified information with people he wasn't supposed to. We'll now introduce today's witness. The Honorable Robert Hur was appointed as a special counsel in January 2023 to investigate the removal and retention of classified documents discovered at the Penn Biden Center for Diplomacy and Global Engagement. He previously served as the Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General at the Department of Justice and as the United States Attorney for the District of Maryland. He was a law clerk for Chief Justice William Rehnquist and also clerked for Judge Alex Kaczynski on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. We welcome our witness and thank him for appearing today.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Nadler, Chairman Comer, Ranking Member Raskin, members of the committee, good morning. I'm privileged to have served our country for the majority of my career, a decade and a half, most of those years with the Department of Justice. I have served as a line prosecutor, a supervisor, the Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General, a United States Attorney, and a Special Counsel. I've served in these roles with gratitude as the son of immigrants to this country, the first member of my family to be born here. My parents grew up in Korea and were young children during the Korean War. My father remembers being hungry and grateful for the food that American GIs shared with him and his siblings. My mother fled what is now North Korea in her own mother's arms, heading south to safety. My parents eventually met, married, and came to the U.S., seeking a better life for themselves and for their children. Their lives and mine would have been very different were it not for this country. No matter the role, no matter the administration, I have applied the same standards and the same impartiality. My respect for the Justice Department and my commitment to this country are why I agreed to serve as special counsel when asked by the Attorney General. I resolved to do the work as I did all my work for the department, fairly, thoroughly, and professionally, with close attention to the policies and practices that govern department prosecutors. My team and I conducted a thorough, independent investigation. We identified evidence that the president willfully retained classified materials after the end of his vice presidency when he was a private citizen. This evidence included an audio-recorded conversation during which Mr. Biden told his ghostwriter that he had, quote, just found all the classified stuff downstairs, end quote. When Mr. Biden said this, he was a private citizen speaking to his ghostwriter in his private rental home in Virginia. We also identified other recorded conversations during which Mr. Biden read classified information aloud to his ghostwriter. We did not, however, identify evidence that rose to the level of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Because the evidence fell short of that standard, I declined to recommend criminal charges against Mr. Biden. The department's regulations required me to write a confidential report explaining my decision to the Attorney General. I understood that my explanation about this case had to include rigorous, detailed, and thorough analysis. In other words, I needed to show my work, just as I would expect any prosecutor to show his or her work explaining the decision to prosecute or not. The need to show my work was especially strong here. The Attorney General had appointed me to investigate the actions of the Attorney General's boss, the sitting President of the United States. I knew that for my decision to be credible, I could not simply announce that I recommended no criminal charges and leave it at that. I needed to explain why. My report reflects my best effort to explain why I declined to recommend charging President Biden. I analyzed the evidence as prosecutors routinely do, by assessing its strengths and weaknesses, including by anticipating the ways in which the president's defense lawyers might poke holes in the government's case, if there were a trial, and seek to persuade jurors that the government could not prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. There has been a lot of attention paid to language in the report about the president's memory, so let me say a few words about that. My task was to determine whether the president retained or disclosed national defense information willfully. That means knowingly and with the intent to do something the law forbids. I could not make that determination without assessing the president's state of mind. For that reason, I had to consider the president's memory and overall mental state and how a jury likely would perceive his memory and mental state in a criminal trial. These are the types of issues that prosecutors analyze every day. And because these issues were important to my ultimate decision, I had to include a discussion of them in my report to the Attorney General. The evidence and the president himself put his memory squarely at issue. We interviewed the president and asked him about his recorded statement, quote, "I just found all the classified stuff downstairs," end quote. He told us that he didn't remember saying that to his ghostwriter. He also said he didn't remember finding any classified material in his home after his vice presidency. And he didn't remember anything about how classified documents about Afghanistan made their way into his garage. My assessment in the report about the relevance of the president's memory was necessary and accurate and fair. Most importantly, what I wrote is what I believe the evidence shows and what I expect jurors would perceive and believe. I did not sanitize my explanation, nor did I disparage the president unfairly. I explained to the Attorney General my decision and the reasons for it. That's what I was required to do. I took the same approach when I compared the evidence regarding President Biden to the department's allegations against former President Trump. There, too, I called it like I saw it. As a prosecutor, I had to consider relevant precedents and to explain why different facts justify different outcomes. That is what I did in my report. I'm confident the analysis set forth in chapters 11, 12, and 13 of my report provides a thorough evaluation and explanation of the evidence, and I encourage everyone to read it to inform their opinions of the report. Prosecutors rarely write public reports or testify about their investigations. That is the Justice Department's long-standing policy, and it protects important interests. My team and I prepared the report to the Attorney General with care, and the report stands as the primary source of information. My responses today will be limited to clarifying information for the committee. I will refrain from speculating or commenting on areas outside the scope of the investigation, nor will I discuss what investigative steps we did or did not take beyond what's in the report. In conclusion, I want to express my heartfelt thanks to the attorneys, agents, analysts, and professional staff who helped us do our work fairly, thoroughly, and independently. I am grateful and privileged to have served with them. I single out for particular thanks Deputy Special Counsel Mark Crickbaum, a former United States attorney himself, who brought great wisdom, skill, and judgment to our task. Thank you. I welcome your questions.
How could that possibly happen? How could anyone be that irresponsible? And I thought, what data was in there that could compromise sources, methods, and it's just totally irresponsible? As President Biden's statement about Donald Trump and the classified documents. Mr. Hur, classified documents were found at the Penn Biden Center?
That's correct.
They were found in President Biden's garage?
In Wilmington, Delaware, yes.
And in his basement den?
Also in the same home, yes.
In his main floor office?
Correct.
And his third floor den?
Correct.
At the University of Delaware?
Correct.
And at the Biden Institute?
Correct.
So whether or not you meet the elements of the crime, which I think it's clear that he does, the second part of this is this, and that's where it gets into the sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. You could have just said we don't prosecute sitting presidents, but you did not. And you entered this, but that doesn't have anything to do with the actual elements of the crime. That has to do with getting a conviction at trial, correct?
Well, Congressman, part and parcel of a prosecutor's judgment as to whether or not a conviction is the probable outcome of trial is assessing how the evidence identified during the investigation lines up with the elements and what proof can be offered to a jury during a trial.
Sure, but his well-meaning elderly old man has nothing to do with the underlying elements of the crime.
Well, it certainly has
It's a
something.
presentation to the jury.
It certainly has something.
Back. Gentleman can respond.
It certainly has something to do with the way that a jury is going to perceive and receive and consider and make conclusions based on evidence at trial, Congressman.
Your ultimate conclusion was that President Biden could not be charged with a crime because even after your thorough investigation, you could not find sufficient evidence to charge him, correct?
My conclusion was that based on my evaluation of the evidence as a prosecutor.
Don't feel about it, correct?
I'm sorry, Congressman, I didn't hear your last question.
I said based on your conclusion, your ultimate conclusion is that President Biden could not be charged with a crime because even after your thorough investigation, you could not find sufficient evidence to charge him. Correct or not correct?
My ultimate conclusion was that criminal charges were not warranted.
Correct. Now let's talk about why. I have limited time, so please, when I say correct or not correct, answer the question. Now let's talk. At any point in your investigation, did you have any reason to believe that President Biden lied to you?
I do address in my report one response that the President gave to a question that we had posed to him that we deemed to be not credible.
Was it clear he didn't lie?
I'm sorry, Congressman.
The report is clear that he didn't lie, or that he caused his staff to lie to you, and that he didn't cause his staff to lie to you. Your report is clear on that. You agree that causing someone to lie to the FBI is a classic example of obstruction of justice?
It is an example of obstruction, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hur, I first want to get this straight. Is it now okay if I take home top secret documents, store them in my garage, and read portions of them to friends or associates?
Congressman, I wouldn't recommend it, but I don't want to entertain any hypotheticals at this point.
Was it okay? I mean, I can do that now under this new doctrine?
Again, Congressman, I wouldn't recommend that you do that, but
well,
I don't want to.
you've essentially said so in your report, and certainly it would be exculpatory if I simply told you, hey, I'm getting old, I don't remember stuff the way I used to.
Congressman, I'm not here to get into hypotheticals. I'm here to talk about the facts and the work that I did.
It was not a hypothetical. This is the issue at hand. You said, for example, that there was no evidence beyond reasonable doubt. Well, you got the fact that he had classified material in his possession and control in multiple settings for multiple years, that he told others he was aware of this, and that he shared that material with others. The mind boggles at what beyond reasonable doubt would actually mean.
Well, as I set forth at length in my explanations in chapters 11 and 12 of the report, my assessment is that the evidence, if presented at trial alongside potential defense arguments, would not probably result in a conviction at trial.
Well, that's one of the points you make, is that President Biden's likely to be an elderly, sympathetic figure with a poor memory. But how does that bear on any individual's guilt or innocence? Isn't that, again, a question for a judge or jury to decide after guilt or innocence is determined?
It is.
And again, here's the problem. Donald Trump's being prosecuted for exactly the same act that you've documented that Joe Biden committed.
Congressman, if I understood your question correctly, you said, isn't that a question for a jury? And it most certainly, through the lens of
my question is, does that bear on the guilt or innocence of an individual?
It certainly bears on how a jury is going to receive and perceive and make decisions.
So the
based
answer
on
to my
evidence.
earlier question is correct. All I have to do when I'm caught taking home classified materials to say, I'm sorry, Mr. Herbert, but I'm getting old. My memory's not so great.
Yeah, Congressman,
This is the doctrine that you've established in our laws now, and it's frightening.
Congressman, my intent is certainly not to establish any sort of doctrine. I had a particular task. I have a particular set of evidence to consider and make a judgment with respect to one particular set of evidence, and that is what I did.
Mr. Hur, how much did President Biden get paid for his book?
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure if that information appears in the report.
Sure does. There's a dollar amount in there. You remember?
I don't. It may be $8 million. If that's
$8 million. Joe Biden had 8 million reasons to break the rules. Took classified information and shared it with the guy who was writing the book. That's why he did. He knew the rules, but he broke them for $8 million in a book advance. What did that ghostwriter do with the information Joe Biden shared with him on his laptop? What did he do after you were named special counsel?
Chairman, if you're referring to the audio recordings that Mr. Zwanitzer created of his conversations with
Exactly
Mr. Biden,
what I'm referring to.
He slid, if I remember correctly, he slid those files into his recycle bin on his computer.
Tried to destroy the evidence, didn't he?
Correct.
How many visits to the Penn Biden Center were made by either White House employees or President Biden's personal attorneys before the official discovery of documents in November 2022?
I don't have that figure at hand, but that should be detailed in Chapter 14 of the report, sir.
With the president having to be in and out to deal with an international crisis, and after the interview, he provided handwritten answers to additional questions, correct?
Congresswoman, I don't recall the president being in and out during our interview to handle the internet.
Let me go on.
February 8th, the White House question, Mr. President, why did you share classified information with your ghostwriter? The president, I did not share classified information. I did not share it. I guarantee I did not. That's not true, is it, Mr. Hur?
That is inconsistent with the findings based on the evidence in my report.
Yeah, so it's a lie, is just what regular people would say, right? Yeah, all right. So the next one. And all the stuff that was in my home was in filing cabinets that were either locked or able to be locked. That wasn't true either, was it?
That was inconsistent with the findings of our investigation.
Another lie, people might say, right? Because what you put in your report was among the places Mr. Biden's lawyers found classified documents in the garage was a damaged open box. So here's what I'm understanding, right? As Mr. Armstrong laid out, you find in your report that the elements of a federal criminal violation are met, but then you apply this senile cooperator theory, that because Joe Biden cooperated and the elevator doesn't go to the top floor, you don't think you get a conviction. And I actually think you get to the right answer in that. I don't think Biden should have been charged, don't think Trump should have been charged. But under the senile cooperator theory, isn't it frustrating that Biden continues to go out and lie about the basic facts of the report that lay out a federal criminal violation?
Congressman, I need to disagree with at least one thing that you said, which is that I found that all of the elements were met. One of the elements of the relevant mishandling statute is the intent element, and what my report reflects is my judgment that based on the evidence, I would not be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury that that intent element had been met.
Right, but the reason you have that doubt is the senile cooperator theory. The fact that Joe Biden is so inept in responding that you can't prove the intent, which again, I don't quibble with that conclusion, but it's frustrating to be like, oh, well, this guy's not getting treated the same way as Trump because the elevator's not going to the top floor, so we can't prove intent. While at the same time, Biden goes out there at the White House and says, well, you know, he just blatantly lies. And what I'm trying to figure out is whether or not Biden's lying because he's still so senile, he hasn't read your report, or whether it's a little craftier and a little more devious and perhaps a little more intentional than we might otherwise think. So I also want to go to this Biden Penn Center. Like, did it give concern to you that the Biden Penn Center, where all this classified stuff was being mishandled, was being floated by foreign governments?
Congressman, we were concerned with getting to the bottom of all of the classified documents that were recovered during the course of our...
Yeah, but what bothers me is that the money that was paying for the place where the documents were being inappropriately held, it was the Chinese and it was other foreign countries. Did that play into your analysis? Did you look into the $1 billion in foreign funding sources at the Biden Center at UPenn, for example?
Congressman, we conducted a thorough, impartial, and fair investigation, and we were very, very concerned with getting to the bottom of all the relevant questions relating to the recovered documents.
Did you look into the fact that the Chinese were floating the place where this guy was keeping the documents unsecure? Yes or no?
Congressman, to the extent that we identified evidence that was relevant and significant to our investigation, we put it in our report.
Okay, well, it seemed relevant to me, maybe not to you. Another thing that seemed relevant to me is this ghostwriter, right? So the ghostwriter purposefully deletes this evidence that seems to be like show culpability of Biden's crimes, and you don't charge him. Why did you not charge the ghostwriter with obstructing justice and deleting evidence?
Well, for a number of reasons that are laid out in the report, but in brief, Congressman, yes, when we interviewed the ghostwriter, he did tell us, and I'm trying to get the exact language, that one of the things on his mind, one of the things he was aware of, was that I had been appointed special counsel and was conducting an investigation.
Right, so he didn't, just so everybody knows, the ghostwriter didn't delete the recordings just as a matter of happenstance. Ghostwriter has recordings of Biden making admissions of crimes. He then learns that you've been appointed. He then deletes the information that is the evidence, and you don't charge him.
That is reflected in the report, and one of the reasons...
Like, what does somebody have to do to get charged with obstruction of justice by you? If like deleting the evidence of crimes doesn't count, what would meet the standard?
So, Congressman, as we state in the relevant chapter of the report, one of the things that Mr. Zwanitzer did not delete was transcripts of the recordings that he had created that included inculpatory evidence relating to Mr. Biden.
Oh, so if you destroy some evidence but not other evidence, that somehow absolves you of the evidence you destroy? Like, here's what I see. Zwanniger should have been charged, wasn't. Biden and Trump should have been treated equally, they weren't, and that is the double standard that I think a lot of Americans are concerned about.
Did you receive any pressure from Mr. Garland or his staff to make any specific factual finding or legal conclusion?
No.
Did you receive the resources necessary to carry out your duties?
Yes.
Do you have any reason to believe that you were treated differently with regard to independence or resources than other DOJ special prosecutors?
No.
That's dealing with Ukraine. That's dealing with difficult people like Netanyahu in Israel to try to get something done that's correct. That's what Joe Biden does. And understanding Social Security and Medicaid are important institutions that help seniors, not senile people. I mean, I really object to that comment. People, nobody suggests he's senile, and that's disrespectful of senior people with any kind of memory disability. Lots of seniors have memory disability, but they're not senile, and to do such was shameful. Joe Biden is a competent, good president who knows American values.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Were there notes of the President of the United States that dated back to when he was a senator that contained classified information?
Among the documents that were recovered during our investigation were marked classified documents that dated back to when Mr. Biden was a senator.
When he was in his 30s, 40s, 50s?
I believe that's correct.
In this case, did you reach a conclusion that this man was outright innocent?
That conclusion is not reflected in my report, sir.
Right. So you did not reach that conclusion, or it would have been in your report.
I viewed my task of explaining my decision to the Attorney General as being based on my judgment and my assessment of the evidence. Would a conviction at trial be the probable outcome? And that's
and I just want to make sure the record is complete in that, because I think it's extremely important. You did not reach an idea that he had committed no wrong. You reached a conclusion that you would not prevail at trial and therefore did not take it forward. Is that correct?
Correct, Congressman.
He didn't recall how he got the documents, and you knew that that would play into the Republicans' narrative that the president is unfit for office because he's senile. And the American people saw during the State of the Union address that that was not true. But yet that's what you tried to offer to them, and that's why they are having you here today, so that they can expand upon that narrative. And you knew that that's what was going to happen, didn't you?
Congressman, I reject the suggestions that you have just made. That is not what happened.
Let me move on.
Partisan politics played no part whatsoever in my work.
You are a member of the Federalist Society, are you not?
And fair.
Are you a member of the Federalist Society?
I am not a member of the Federalist Society.
But you are a Republican, though, aren't you?
I am a registered Republican.
Yes, sir. And you're doing everything you can do to get President Trump reelected so that you can get appointed as a federal judge or perhaps to another position in the Department of Justice. Isn't that correct?
Congressman, I have no such aspirations, I can assure you, and I can tell you that partisan politics had no place whatsoever in my work. It had no place in the investigative steps that I took. It had no place in the decision that I made, and it had no place in a single word of my report.
Is it accurate to say that in your interview, President Biden retained and disclosed classified materials as a means to bolster his image as a presidential figure? And I'm going to ask you for yes or no's here because our time is so limited.
I believe words to that effect are in my report, Congressman.
So the answer is yes. Would you agree that President Biden's intent to showcase his legacy provides a motive for his actions concerning classified materials? Yes or no?
It is one of the motives addressed in the report.
Yep, to showcase his legacy.
To understand DOJ policy, that you are to take care not to prejudice the interests of the subject of an investigation, right?
That is generally one of the interests that DOJ policy requires that prosecutors respect.
And it was your obligation to follow that policy in this report, was it not?
It was also my obligation to write a confidential report for the Attorney General explaining completely my decision.
What you did write was deeply prejudicial to the interests of the president. You say it wasn't political, and yet you must have understood. You must have understood the impact of your words. You must have understood the impact of your decision to go beyond the specifics of a particular document, to go to the very general, to your own personal, prejudicial, subjective opinion of the president, one you knew would be amplified by his political opponent, one you knew that would influence a political campaign. You had to understand that. And you did it anyway. And you did it anyway.
He knew and told the guy that he's going to expose that classified material to, hey, be careful. Be careful. It may be classified. That indicates something a little bit more than mere knowledge. Indicates that he has some intent there. Because the next thing he should have said is, hey, I don't know if it's classified, but we're going to skip over this until that's resolved. He didn't do that. What he said is, read it anyway. Yield back.
So I want to first see if you will pledge to not accept an appointment from Donald Trump if he is elected again as president.
Congressman, I'm not here to testify
Seems like an
today
easy
about
answer.
what will happen in the future.
Considering what I just laid out.
I'm here to talk about the report and the work that went into it. And
But you don't want to be associated with that guy again, do you?
Congressman, I'm not here to offer any opinions about what may or may not happen in the future. I'm here to talk about the work that went into the report, which I stand by.
Can you offer any guidance to this committee why you would put that summary in your report as opposed to saying that he gave inconsistent answers, or in fact, why didn't you nail down in the transcript which was the right answer? He's given answers that says no, and then he says yes. Why didn't you pursue it until you knew?
Congressman, the report reflects our best efforts to summarize and characterize the evidence in the investigation, including the investigation we received from the president himself during our interview of him. But as you point out, the transcripts of the president's interview over 2 days are now available to the committee for their inspection, and the members are able to draw their own conclusions based on the transcripts that are now available to them.
Well, and I appreciate your answer. And I certainly think things, you can come up with some details that someone can disagree on, and it has the quality, I know, of some cherry picking because I've just found something, but we've only had a little bit of time to look. I don't think it serves this process well for the Justice Department to dump these transcripts into the public right now. If they were going to be released, they should have been released at a proper time.
The primary law that you analyzed for potential prosecution was part of the Espionage Act, 18 U.S.C. 793E, which criminalizes willful retention or disclosure of national defense information. Is that correct?
Congresswoman, that is one statute that we analyzed. I need to go back and make sure that I take note of the word that you used, exoneration. That is not a word that appears in the report, and that's not part of my task as a prosecutor.
I'm going to continue with my questions. I know that the term
I ultimately reached related to whether sufficient evidence existed such that the likely outcome
you exonerated
would be a conviction.
I know that the term willful
retention
has a... Mr. Hur, it's my time. Thank you.
Is there something more than that, that just, I don't recall something, for you to actually decide? Because it seems that this is the core of the whole investigation. Why didn't you pursue further the charges?
Congresswoman, my judgment as to how a jury would likely perceive and receive and consider evidence relating to all the evidence that would be put in by both the government and the defense at trial, it was based on a number of different sources, from documents, including various recordings, some of them from the 2016-2017 timeframe, some from our interview with the president in October of 2023. I think what you're asking about specifically is how the president presented himself during his interview in October of last year. And of course, I did take into account not just the words from the cold record of the transcript, but the entire manner in living color, in real time, of how the president presented himself during his interview.
Hopefully he didn't smart you and all of us. But before I yield, I just wanted to actually just comment on something, Mr. Raskin mentioned about, us not remembering communists. I actually grew up under communists, and I have a very good recollection what it is. And unfortunately, Terrence I on the rise, on the march, which he said, unfortunately, they've been emboldened by, President Obama, now by President Biden too. And unfortunately, our government in Department of Justice is really now resembles, a tyrannical government. It's sad for me to see that, but I'm going, and with a really double standard what we have there, but I'm going to yield to Chairman Jordan the rest of my time.
Did the White House then, once they got the report before it went public, did the White House try to weigh in with your investigation on elements of that report and frankly get the report changed?
They did request certain edits and changes to the draft report.
Yeah, I see that in the February 5th letter. Did they only correspond with you?
I'm sorry, Congressman, are you asking if they corresponded with anyone else on my team?
Once you gave the report to the White House,
yes,
they sought changes. I have one letter here that's addressed to you on February 5th, and they said, we're pleased that after more of a year of investigating, you've determined, they respond to the report. And then they disagree with your, they asked for you to change some of the things you had in your report, namely the fact that the president's memory was not very good. You remember that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, but I also have two other letters. One on February 7th to Merrick Garland, where they raise the same concern, and then on February 12th, where they go to the DAG, Bradley Weinsheimer. You familiar with those?
I am familiar with those letters. Bradley Weinsheimer is an assistant or associate deputy attorney general.
Right, associate DAG, the ADAG, right?
Yes.
And Merrick Garland, of course, is the attorney general. So yes, you're familiar with the fact that they went over your head?
They were certainly entitled to write whatever letters they wished to Mr. Weinsheimer and to the Attorney General.
I just find that interesting.
To correct on that February 5th letter that was sent to you, asking you to change references to the president's poor memory, wasn't there a request by the White House to do that?
There was a request, yes.
And, Mr. Chairman, I think the record should show that the gentleman from Maryland earlier said that that was not the case. I think he said, nor did he seek to redact a single word of Hur's report. Obviously, Mr. Hur is telling us differently here. And didn't the White House then go to the Attorney General himself and say that he would like to see changes to the references in regards to the president's memory?
The White House counsel did send such a letter.
Have you set new precedent here today?
To the extent that the Department of Justice makes enforcement decisions or non-enforcement decisions in particular cases, those are precedents. Those are events that future prosecutors do look to in an endeavor to make sure that federal law is applied consistently over time.
Mr. Hur, based on your report, did you find that the president was senile?
I did not. That conclusion does not appear in my report, Congressman.
You felt, though, that the president's memory or lack thereof was a critical reason to decline prosecution. The reason I'm asking this is whether you believe the president would be fit to stand trial, or do you think his lawyers would argue his incompetence to stand trial due to his state of mind? Also, was he in a place to actually be questioned?
Congressman, my report, to the extent that it addresses the president's memory gaps that we identified in the evidence that we obtained during our investigation. They are addressed in the context of determining how the jury would perceive, receive, and consider evidence relating to whether or not the president had willful intent when it came to retaining or disclosing national defense information.
Your report is not an exoneration so much as a determination that the evidence as you saw it would not overcome the defenses that you had identified, plus whatever lack of evidence you perceived. So it's not an exoneration, is it?
The word exoneration does not appear anywhere in my report, and that is not my conclusion.
You didn't reach this decision because President Biden was sympathetic. Is that correct?
I reached the decision based on the totality of the reasons that I set forth at length in my report.
Based on the evidence. And while Mr. Trump, who is being prosecuted, is not sympathetic, you didn't calibrate any of that in there. Sympathetic, not sympathetic. Doesn't matter. It's the evidence, right?
Congresswoman, I did not reach any assessments of the evidence in the Trump matter. To the extent that I considered the allegations against former President Trump, it was for purposes of comparing relevant precedents.
That with your credibility, you were not out to get Mr. Trump, nor here to help Mr. Biden.
Mr. Hur, why did the White House ask you to remove parts of the report? What was the reason they gave for that?
I don't have the letter in front of me, Congressman. I believed that among their reasons was that they contested or that they asserted that certain language in the report was inconsistent with DOJ policy.
The day that your report came out, the president gave a live news conference on national television. Did you watch that news conference?
I watched the press conference, yes.
What was your reaction to seeing the president personally attack you and your team?
Congressman, I'm here to talk about the work that went into the report and my declination decision and my explanation of it for the attorney.
And it wasn't just the president. Anthony Coley, former spokesman for Merrick Garland, has said that Democrats should focus their ire on her. The president's personal attorney, Bob Bauer, said that your report is a shabby piece of work and a shoddy work product. Do you agree with that characterization of your report?
I disagree vehemently with that characterization of my report.
Today, the ranking member started his opening statement by saying, Mr. Hur completely exonerated President Biden and called your report a total and complete exoneration. Mr. Hur, did you completely exonerate President Biden?
That is not what my report does.
Was your report a total and complete exoneration?
That is not what the report says.
So the statement by the ranking member was incorrect, yes?
As I said, the report is not an exoneration. That word does not appear in my report.
But unless there was some issue undisclosed to the American people during his 50 years in office, you found that Mr. Biden fully understood his legal responsibility related to the handling of classified materials, which is why you concluded in your report that Mr. Biden, quote, willfully retained and disclosed classified materials after his vice presidency when he was a private citizen. You state that on page 1, correct?
I believe that what I stated on page 1 was that we identified evidence that Mr. Biden willfully retained classified information after the end of his vice presidency, but ultimately we concluded that the evidence was insufficient to warrant.
I understand that. Please listen to my question. What I'm getting at is that Mr. Biden fully understood that he could not keep classified information at his home as both a former senator and vice president. Isn't that right? He understood that, correct?
My understanding is that based on the evidence, my assessment was that a jury...
That isn't what my question was. Please listen to my question. My question was that Mr. Biden understood when he was a senator and vice president that he could not keep classified materials at his home, at his garage, and in other offices. Is that fair?
I don't think that's accurate, Congresswoman, because when Mr. Biden was vice president, he was authorized to have classified material in his home.
But after he left, he knew that he was not entitled to keep classified information at his home, correct?
After he left, there is evidence to suggest that he knew that he could not legally have classified information in his home.
There's one thing I want to go back to, though, to be clear. It's been said today that your report is tantamount to a total exoneration of President Biden. That's not correct, is it?
That is not correct.
All right. Thank you, sir. I yield the balance of my time to the chair.
Over the last 3 election cycles, there's only been 3 people who have ran for president. Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Donald Trump. All 3 of them have been accused of mishandling classified documents. Only one of them has been prosecuted. And that's what the American people see. That's what we see. We had Hillary Clinton, who ran a program called Bleach It on her server. They used hammers to destroy evidence. Joe Biden has a 50-year history of misplacing classified documents in numerous different places. All of these cases have the same underlying elements of the crime, the same fact patterns, and yet we only see one person being prosecuted. And with that, I yield back to the gentleman from Kentucky.
For the reasons summarized below, we conclude that the evidence does not establish Mr. Biden's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. You still share that, still hold that view?
I do.
Okay, and even though you objected to the use of the word exonerated, from your perspective, he's been cleared of all criminal charges in your investigation. Is that fair?
I determined that based on the evidence, criminal charges are not warranted.
Okay.
You outline what that motive is. Can you tell me what is the motive for keeping the Thanksgiving Day memo?
One of the motives that we addressed in the report was that the issue of whether or not a troop surge should be sent to Afghanistan in 2009 was a hotly contested and debated issue within the Obama administration back in 2009, and one in which then Vice President Biden had a significant role, and he felt very strongly about.
And in fact, in their February 16th meeting, which has been alluded to earlier, isn't it true that President Biden read aloud and nearly verbatim classified information regarding the actions and views of U.S. military leaders and the CIA director relating to the foreign country and a foreign terrorist organization?
I believe that occurred, that was captured in a recording later in 2017, I believe in April of 2017, not February.
Okay. And Mr. Zwaneter became aware of your appointment as special counsel, correct?
At some point, Mr. Zwaneter did become aware of my appointment, yes.
And upon learning of the investigation, Mr. Zwaneter deleted digital audio recordings of his conversations with Mr. Biden during the writing of the book, Promise Me, Dad.
Correct.
Did investigators with your office interviewed Mr. Zwaneter about the deleted recordings, and he admitted that part of his motivation for deleting this recording was because he was aware there was an investigation, correct?
Correct.
One other thing I think is important for folks to understand is President Biden had this information everywhere. I mean, you said they initially went to the Penn Biden Center. Which location was it at? Do you remember when they initially did their look? Was it at the transition office? Was it at the temporary Penn Biden Center in Chinatown? Or was that at its current location where the Penn Biden Center currently sits here in, final location, I guess, in D.C.? You remember?
I believe the visit that I referenced in March 2021 that's described on page 257 was to the Penn Biden Center's permanent and current location.
Permanent and current. So there were three places, those three places classified information was at. Is that fair to say?
That's correct. The initial transition office, immediately after the end of the vice presidency, the Penn Biden Center's temporary office, and then the Penn Biden Center's permanent office.
Okay. So those, and then you had the University of Delaware Library, the University of Delaware Biden Center, right? So that's 5 total. And then you had multiple places in his home.
Correct.
The garage, the den, the office upstairs, and the office downstairs.
Correct.
So what is that? That's like 9 different places.
I've lost count, sir, but
yeah,
that sounds right.
It's everywhere. And it was documents over a 50-year time frame. And then by comparison, because the Democrats want to keep comparing to President Trump's classified documents right at his home with Secret Service protection. I don't know that they're anywhere else, were they?
I'm not aware of other locations, President.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction. I would yield back to the gentleman for South Carolina. Appreciate him yielding.
So here's where I disagree with your portion of the report on willful, is that you have a gentleman who served 36 years in the Senate. I've only been here a year, but I understand the importance of handling classified information. He served 8 years as vice president. In 2010, it came to the attention of the vice president's staff that classified briefing books had not been returned. Even if they were returned, some of the content was missing. The same year, the executive secretary raised that nearly 30 of the classified briefing books from the first 6 months of 2010 were missing. In August of that year, then Vice President Biden failed to return top secret, sensitive compartmented information contents of a classified briefing book from a trip that he took to the Hamptons. And to date, you were unable to determine if these documents were ever recovered. Is that correct?
Correct.
So to me, this wasn't. When does willfulness when does willfulness factor in? Is it now in his diminished mental capacity, or is it then when he was serving as senator and vice president?
A jury would be assessing President Biden's mental state and his intent, or whether or not he had willfulness at the time that the conduct was committed.
Correct, and I think everyone can kind of plainly see the transgression or the difference between then candidate Biden or Vice President Biden and what is going on now.
Where is the willfulness missing?
Well, sir, prosecutor to prosecutor, I certainly agree with you that the evidence in the form of the audio recorded statement where the president said to his ghostwriter, "I just found all the classified stuff downstairs," that is evidence that that any prosecutor would present as significant evidence in a case if this went to trial. And reasonable jurors might well infer that President Biden formed criminal intent based on that piece of evidence. But what we did in our report was to try to walk through exhaustively. You know well as a prosecutor, you need to assess with a very cold eye the strengths of your case and the weaknesses of your case, and try to anticipate arguments that defense counsel might well present at trial. And what we tried to do in our report was to walk through potential arguments that would be presented by defense lawyers at the president's trial, and to determine how, by our judgment, how jurors would receive and perceive the evidence presented, including but not limited to evidence relating to the president's memory gaps that were in various pieces of evidence that we assessed.
So how do you overcome that recording where he says, I've got classified documents? He's 30 years in the Senate or whatever it is. He obviously knows how he has to treat classified documents. I've got classified documents in the basement. What is the defense to that? That it was a made-up recording? That it wasn't his voice? That everyone was wrong? How do you defend that particular fact, as well as I did a lot of tax cases. You had to prove a pattern of conduct. And in this case, he had a lot of documents in a lot of places. How do you overcome those things?
Yes, Congressman. So we walk through a number of different evidentiary gaps that reasonable jurors might focus on, as well as a number of different defense arguments that the president's defense lawyers could present at trial. The first is a theory or an argument to the jury that the president, yes, he did say to his ghostwriter, I just found all the classified stuff downstairs, but then soon thereafter forgot about the documents. And therefore, it would be difficult to convince a jury that actually he knew that it was illegal to keep the documents and he continued to do so. A second argument that we considered is that perhaps these documents never actually were in Virginia in his private rental home there. Perhaps the documents were there by virtue of staff or himself having those documents at the Delaware home from the time that he was still vice president all the way through the time of their being discovered. And finally, another theory that we walk through in the report is that there were 2 folders of marked classified documents relating to Afghanistan found in the box in the president's Delaware garage. One of them contained national defense information, and the other, it would be a more difficult task to persuade a jury that it did contain national defense information. So that argument would be premised on perhaps the president was referring to the one folder that didn't contain national defense information, but was not. It would be difficult for the government to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he possessed the one that did contain national defense information. So I just laid a lot on you there, but we do our best to explain that at some length in the report.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady from Texas, recognized.
I thank you. There's been a lot of time being shared, Mr. Chairman. I asked your very brief indulgence.
Wait. You got a unanimous consent, or you asking a question?
Your brief indulgence and unanimous consent dash question.
No. You can do a unanimous consent request, but you don't get to get another round. Someone comes to yield you time, but I don't think they can do that because everyone on the Democrat side has taken their time. You know that I appreciate the gentlelady from Texas, but you don't get to go 2 rounds.
I'm not trying to go 2 rounds, but
if you got a unanimous consent request you want in the record, state so. If not, then I
am getting ready to do the unanimous consent request, hoping that someone would come through the door. I ask unanimous consent.
It could only be a Republican because all the Democrats have spoken.
I ask unanimous consent that we add to the record as stated from page 1 of the executive summary. We conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter. We would reach the same conclusion even if the Department of Justice policy did not foreclose criminal charges against the sitting president. I ask unanimous consent that that sentence be put in. Secondarily, I ask unanimous consent and a
unanimous consent to add something to the record that's already in the record. God bless you. We'll do it.
Thank you. And I add, with the emphasis of Sheila Jackson Lee does not have, and I particularly ask that this be added to the record that Mr. Hur stated that Biden couldn't recall when his son Beau died. I add the unanimous consent out of an article in Politico and indicate that there was no mercy given to Mr. Biden and no mercy given to him in the decision of this report.
Without objection, so entered. Mr. Hur, even though there wasn't a question in there, do you want to respond to any of that?
No, Chairman.
All right. Mr. Hur, we want to thank you for
I
being
yield
here
back.
today. And we wish the best to you and your family. This concludes today's hearing. We thank our witnesses for appearing before the committee today without objection. All members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witness or additional materials for the record. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.